Springtime in Noisy Village. My name is Lisa, and the place where I live is called Noisy Village. There are only 3 farms there, and only 6 children. Britta and Anna live at North Farm, Carl and Bill and I live at Middle Farm, and Olaf lives at South Farm. Oh, and there's Kirsten, Olaf's little sister. How could I forget her? Olaf thinks Kirsten is the most wonderful thing in all Noisy Village, though it's hard work looking after her, he always says. Britta and Anna and I help him with her sometimes. You need almost a whole school class to look after that little rascal, Anna says. We have lots of fun when spring comes to Noisy Village, and it's very beautiful then. Snowdrops and crocuses and narcissus and tulips are in bloom in the gardens, and thousands of millions of white and blue windflowers grow in the fields. Picking flowers is something Kirsten likes, but her mother has told her she must pick only wild flowers and not the ones growing on the lawn. One day last spring I saw Kirsten walking through the garden. She had picked nearly all her mother's narcissus, so I shouted to her, "Stop that! You know you mustn't pick those." "But they're wild," said Kirsten. "They are olify wild." Kirsten says olify instead of awfully. Britta and Anna and I took Kirsten and sat her in her little wagon and pulled her to our cow pasture, for there she could pick as many white and blue windflowers as she liked. She picked a few, and then shook her head and said, "These are not olify wild like those others." Britta and Anna and I have built a playhouse in the clearing. That's something you have to do in spring. We have a box for a table and stools to sit on. We have another box for a cupboard, and in the cupboard are my doll's dishes. One day we invited Kirsten to a party and gave her fruit juice to drink and buns to eat. She liked that. She likes animals too. While we were sitting there drinking juice, we saw a little hedgehog in the grass. Kirsten wanted to pat it. "No, don't. It pricks," said Britta. But Kirsten still wanted to pat it, and she did too. Then she cried, and she was terribly angry with us, as if it was our fault hedgehogs have prickly spines. Carl and Bill and Olaf were sailing paper boats in the brook running through our pasture. We went there with Kirsten to show her the boat so she would stop crying. But the first thing she did was to sit down in the middle of the brook. Then she screamed so that she could be heard all the way home to her mother. "Little children should be locked up in the spring," said Carl, "because as soon as they see a wet place, they sit in it." Just as he said that, he slipped on a wet stone and sat down in the brook himself. Olaf laughed and said, "Little children should be locked up in the spring because as soon as they see a wet place, they sit in it." Then he took Kirsten home, and she screamed all the way. Everyone in Noisy Village could hear her. There are wet places everywhere in the spring. Sometimes when we're going home from school, the road is a river of slippery mud. Our rubber boots go splash, splash through the mud, and we walk into the biggest puddles we can find. Sometimes the boys walk in the ditch, too, and get their boots full of water. Sometimes we walk along the top of the fence. One day a woman saw us and thought we were walking up there to keep our feet dry. She didn't know we were doing it just for fun. "Who said we must only walk on the road?" Carl asked afterward. "Some grown-up, I suppose," said Bill. And that's what I think, too. We have lots of animals here in Noisy Village, horses and cows and pigs and sheep and hens and cats, and Olaf has a dog called Skip. When spring comes, calves and piglets and lambs and chickens are born all over Noisy Village, and sometimes a foal, too. Every morning we go out to see if any new animal has come in the night. One morning this spring, something wonderful happened. Daddy gave me a little lamb for my very own. It had no mother, so I was to be its mother instead. "You must feed it from a bottle," said Daddy, "just as if it were a baby." I called my lamb Pontus. "If you get tired of feeding him, I'll help you," said Anna. But I only said, "As if I could ever get tired of feeding a little lamb." I didn't know then that lambs are nearly always hungry. Sometimes when I'm warming milk for Pontus, he comes trotting into the kitchen to see whether his bottle is ready. Our kitten doesn't like that. He thinks lambs shouldn't be allowed in kitchens. We have a ram named Ulrich, and he is awfully cross. One day Daddy had driven the sheep into the clearing, and we all went off to feed Pontus. But when I caught sight of Ulrich in the middle of the flock, I said, "I daren't go in while Ulrich is there." "But I dare," said Carl. "Give me the bottle." So he climbed over the fence. Then Ulrich came toward him, looking very fierce. "Who's afraid of you?" said Carl. And then he turned around and ran as fast as he could, with Ulrich after him. Carl jumped over the fence just in time, and Ulrich's horns hit the fence with a bang. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" said Carl. "No, not on this side of the fence," Bill said. Afterward, when Daddy had helped us with Ulrich and Pontus had been fed, Bill said to Carl, "You're not very brave, Carl." "I am so," replied Carl. Then the boys began talking about who was the bravest. "I dare to jump down from the woodshed roof," cried Carl. "Me too," said Bill. "So do I," said Olaf. One by one, all of them jumped down from the roof of the woodshed. Then Carl said, "I dare to ride on the bull." Our bull is the gentlest bull in the world. He was tethered to the fence, and he didn't even blink when Carl climbed on his back. He didn't move either, so it wasn't much of a ride. Bill laughed and said, "I dare to do that too." "So do I," said Olaf. But then Britta said, "I dare to walk along the top of the barn roof." There was a ladder against the gable of the barn, and Britta climbed up. But just as she began walking along the roof, her mother opened the kitchen window and cried, "Are you mad, child? Come down at once." So Britta came down. Suddenly we caught sight of Kirsten. She was pulling our cat's tail as hard as she could. "I dare to hold Kitty by its handle," she said. But I said, "Are you mad, child? Let go at once." Then Britta said, "Is there anyone else here who's brave?" Carl said, "We're all pretty brave, aren't we?" After that we played hide-and-go-seek with Skip. He's a very clever dog, and he can always find us no matter how well we're hidden. And when he finds someone, he barks with all his might. Kirsten played hide-and-go-seek too. She stood a couple of yards away from Skip and covered her eyes with her hands. She thought Skip couldn't see her, but Skip didn't understand that Kirsten was playing, so he didn't look for her at all. After that it began to get dark, and Daddy came and set fire to a heap of dead leaves we had raked together. "We'll have a little spring fire," he said. "Hurrah!" we all shouted. Fires out of doors are always beautiful, and most beautiful at twilight. We danced and jumped around ours, pretending we were Indians and shouting and shrieking so that all Noisy Village could hear us. But Kirsten just stood watching. And Daddy said, "Have you all run wild, children?" "Yes, they are all a fee wild," said Kirsten. "But I think all children are wild in the spring. All of us children in Noisy Village certainly are."